Step 11, a spiritual program. A presentation by Robert P. Hello, my name is Robert P. and I'm a grateful member of Nar-Anon, though I speak today as an individual and not as a representative of Nar-Anon. Once upon a time, I thought I had a tranquil life. Then addiction came to my door and it seemed overwhelming. I had no idea what to do. I began to realize that the barrier between me and addiction was like a giant sheet of glass, fragile and transparent. Before I knew what to do, addiction was in my home. I had a huge problem to fix. It took time, but eventually I found Nar-Anon and I heard about the 3 C's. I didn't cause it, I cannot control it, and I cannot cure it. I learned to detach. I was not the addict. The addict's problems were not my problems. I admit, however, that I found comfort in blaming the addict. But once I learned that addiction is a disease, then I could no longer blame the addict. The addict needed treatment. An addict cannot cure themselves of this disease. Now I was ready to learn about boundaries, because that seemed like a way to quarantine this disease. I learned to separate myself from my addicted loved one. I learned to accept addiction as a disease. I began to understand that my loved one needed professional treatment. I saw for myself that my loved one could not stop using. I paid for a lawyer for her legal problems. I went with her to outpatient therapy and I paid for it. I paid for a psychologist. I paid her court fines. I bought her NA and AA books and recordings. I thought she was so deep into a hole that she could not climb out on her own. So I did everything I could think of to save her. As for me, I did not think I had a problem. She had the problem. I was the strong one. I read everything I could. I signed up for classes. I would fix this problem. I just needed to find the right pathway to enlightenment. I needed the path to reach the wisdom I felt I needed. As I studied, I began to change. Nar-Anon was helping me. I began to accept my powerlessness. I knew I needed to get out of the way, but powerlessness does not mean helpless. The 3 C's say, I did not cause it, I cannot control it, and I cannot cure it. But what was it? Then I found an excellent description of the relationship between cause, cure, and control, called the Brickman models of helping and coping. What I had called the disease of addiction, they expanded to call the medical model of treatment. Where I had said my method for self-healing is I am strong, they called that technique the moral model, which implies we think we can cure ourselves just by exerting our willpower. When I felt my loved one was disadvantaged by her circumstances, they described this as an urge to compensate. They say 12-step fellowships behave like a search for enlightenment. But they also warned that a search for enlightenment can turn into a cult. For example, a cult tells you what you're allowed to read. A cult says members cannot talk about unapproved literature. For example, a cult would say, I should not talk about Brickman models of helping and coping. When I talk about the 12 steps, fortunately, I'm not a member of a cult. So I want to give credit here to the researchers who scientifically describe the 3 C's. The Brickman model can be focused onto my view of the addict's life. The disease of addiction fits well with the medical approach to treatment. But is medical treatment effective? Many addicts live successful lives with methadone or Suboxone treatments. But many of the recovering addicts I know say this is not a solution. It can be a helpful starting place, but they do not want to be permanently dependent, simply substituting one chemical for another chemical. Where then does enabling fit? Previously, I had it in the disadvantaged box for the addict. But enabling is not the addicted loved one's behavior, it is my behavior. Also, let's clarify. While the addicted loved one might be disadvantaged, I act to compensate for what I perceive to be their disadvantage. Why did I do such things? Perhaps when I'm in the compensating mode, the loved one goes into the disadvantaged mode. The loved one blames me for their situation, and I buy into it. I need a new way of thinking. Once I learn to disentangle my life from my loved one's life, I can see my actions as like a dance with my loved one. If I think the solution is to compensate, and my loved one acts as if she is disadvantaged, as if she needs me to compensate, we are entangled. Slowly, I realized that the more I compensated, the more she became dependent. The message of Narayan slowly percolated into my mind. I was responsible for my own choices, and she needed to take responsibility for her own life. The willpower treatment method is terribly ineffective. It puts me in the position of God. I accept all the responsibilities for the cause, I accept all responsibility for the cure, and I do this at a time when I'm greatly weakened from the struggle. Then I expect the same from my loved one when she is incapacitated by drugs. In my loved one's case, she could not will herself clean. So she was court-ordered into a lockdown rehabilitation. The people there were professionals. Now we're back into the medical mode of treatment. Now, if you've ever looked inside some of those facilities, professional is only loosely defined in most states to mean at least one person on the staff must have a certificate in addiction treatment. I do not want to disparage the hardworking, highly educated professionals I know. I am criticizing the addiction treatment industry for not doing better. So do you see how this fits into the medical mode? If you proclaim that you are a professional, if you want my money to do your work, then I expect results. The problem is not the people who are trying to get results. The problem is in our expectations that there is anything they can do. While she was inside a treatment facility, I also tried professional help. I met frequently with her outpatient counselor. I took classes in addiction counseling, both to learn from the experts, and so I too could be an expert. If the medical treatment method was the best, then I wanted to be the best in doing it. It took time for me to realize I was helpless. And sadly, there was very little professionals can do for drug addiction. I needed to try something different. In Narayan, I was learning the difference between helpless and powerless. I am not helpless. I can be changed. I just needed a different tool. I cannot use willpower to change myself because I am too weak to make the type of change that is needed. I cannot get results through the medical mode, not because I am helpless, incurable, or utterly lost. No, I did not get results for the same reason I cannot change the addict. No person has the power to change another person. It was time to try something different. Maybe there was something more to these 12 steps than I'd gotten so far. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless over the addict, that our lives become unmanageable. This I understood. Compensating for my loved one's needs did not help either of us. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, I understood this. It fit well with the medical mode. Professionals were supposed to be able to do things I could not do. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. When I did that step, I thought of God as being a super deluxe medical professional. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This I did, though it took a lot of willpower and perseverance to complete. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Okay, back to medical mode. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Yep, medical mode. God is the omnipotent medical professional Yes, I was getting better, but I still was not getting well. I was missing something. It's easy to think the next 3 steps are also about willpower. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed, became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. But I was doing this wrong. Way back in step 1, I admitted I was powerless. Yet every time I came back to the willpower method, I acted as if I am powerful. By the way, do you know what's wrong with the medical method? Steps 4 and 5 ask us to accept responsibility, not for the cure, but for the cause. The medical method assumes we have no responsibility, not for the cure and not for the cause. So the medical method is not the answer. It slowly dawned on me that I did not understand the steps, even though I'd worked them. Well, almost all of them. And I still did not get it. Step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. This is the enlightened method. I accept responsibility for allowing the disease of addiction to affect me. I also admit I cannot fix myself. There's a slogan that says this nicely. I can't, God can, I think I'll let Him. Yes, saying Him is old English. Even saying God might not fit everyone, but the slogan nicely summarizes the enlightened method. The 12 steps. I needed to get to 11 before I understood the previous 10. Beyond that, I also need to incorporate step 12. Step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. The 12-step programs are spiritual programs. With step 1, I admit I cannot cure myself nor my loved one. Whatever treatment I need, it is not found in the top row of the 3 C's table. In step 2, I reiterate that the power to cure our ills is outside us. That power might be medical, psychological, or other, but it is not me. Whatever power is going to help me is in the bottom row of the 3 C's table. In step 3, I choose where I will look for help. I will look to God for help. This is a significant word in step 3. I used to think that wherever I saw God, I could replace that word with higher power. With the help of step 11, I now see that the word God is here because that is the word that fits the 12-step program. In steps 1, 2, and 3, I focused on the cure. In step 4, I began to look at the cause. And step 5 brings us back in contact with God as part of the cure. If I'm the cause and God has the cure, then this is a spiritual program. I missed that when I first worked my steps. Step 6 states it simply. I own the cause, God has the cure. Step 7 is about me and God. Step 7 is not a prayer for God to go fix my loved one. It's a prayer where I admit I am the cause of my own misery, and accept that God can provide the cure. Step 8 was hard for me because I was confused. I experienced painful events in my life. It's important to remember to separate the pain from responsibility for the situation. My tendency is to put myself into the right side column and accept blame for everything. I need to stay in my own lane. On this highway, that is the lane on the left. A key part of step 9 is that I do not set expectations. I seek closure, not restoration. I cannot cure anyone, not even myself. What I try to do with step 9 is to get out of the compensation mode. I need to stop allowing my past to drag me down. Then I can go back into spiritual mode, and God will provide healing. Step 10 is not a willpower step. is a reminder to never venture too far from our spiritual foundation. Step 11 was where it says in plain language what all the other steps have been saying all along. This is a spiritual program. Step 12 is the reminder that we need all 12 steps. This is why I try to carry the message as I understand it. The best way to understand the 12 steps is to work all 12. Then once you understand how the 12 fit together, you can spend as much time as you want digging deeper. To get the most benefit, I needed to first accept the spiritual nature of our program, not try to use willpower, compensation, or even the medical method. This is a spiritual program. In the Narnon Blue booklet, there's a reading called Helping. One paragraph in that reading says, "Remember, all people are always changing. When we judge them, we judge on what we believe we know of them, failing to realize there is much we do not know, and that they are constantly changing as they try for better or worse to cope with life. Give others credit, even as all of us struggle. Give them credit for attempts at progress, even if their changes are not apparent. And above all, give them credit for having had many victories which are unknown. We are all of the same cloth, though of a different cut." Does this make sense? We are the same. We do not need an upper left grid for ourselves and a lower right grid for our loved one. We just need one way to look at helping. So let's rebuild the helping model diagram. We have cause and cure on the outside, and all the ways we try to control are on the inside. This makes a grid with a row and column named self and a row and column named others. The four helping models are willpower, compensation, medical, and enlightened. I began my journey using the willpower method. I lived with active addiction, and I never saw it for what it was. If a challenge came along, I was foolishly confident I could fix it. When addiction finally woke me up, I began searching for the cause. I assumed that if I could find the cause, then I could give my loved one whatever it took to solve her problem. It took time for me to realize that enabling only contributes to the problem. When I finally realized I could not solve this problem, I joined Narnon in a search for the magic wand or the perfect pamphlet. When I did not find them within Narnon, I began taking classes and doing research on my own. If I could not find the expert, then I would become the expert. But no one can change another. By now, the Narnon message was slowly sinking in. Perhaps God was the answer, but not that God I already knew. That was the God who owned the big church who didn't want addicts. What I was learning is that just like no one could give me the magic wand, no one could give me their understanding of God. God and God alone could tell me about God. I then began a search for who to blame. Should I blame myself? Should I blame her? Should she blame herself? Should we blame the drug dealers or society? Should we simply deny all responsibilities? Eventually, I came back to the spiritual approach. I can't. God can. I think I'll let him. The world is beyond my comprehension. I waste time and energy when I search for someone to blame. When I got serious about working my steps, I finally admitted I could not cure anyone, not even myself. I also accepted responsibility for the turmoil within my head. It is my inappropriate reactions that caused me to feel pain. By the time I got to step 3, I was able to stop trying to be God. After all, a common definition of insanity is repeatedly doing the same thing while expecting a different result. I was changing, and the changes within me affected those around me. I strive now to focus on the spiritual principles of our program, but that does not mean I abandoned the other helping methods. I know, for example, that I must do the work to understand the steps. This requires effort, thought, and perseverance. I cannot abandon the compensation method. There are times when helping is appropriate. Sometimes I need help. Sometimes I can help others on their journey. What I can do, however, is learn to set boundaries. What is helping and what is enabling? As for the medical model, my sponsor knows more than I do about these steps. I depend on others within this program. I just need to adjust my expectations. There is no instant cure. It took me years to adapt to sick behaviors. It will take me years to learn new ways to think. When I look at the 12 steps as all being spiritual steps, then step 6 becomes not just a one-time event, but part of my daily life. Steps 1 through 9 became a daily activity, expressed through step 10. Step 11 reminds me that I can accept responsibility for the cause and then turn loose and let God be responsible for the cure. The result is I can live each day in serenity. With practice, I can turn moments of adversity into opportunities to find serenity. I'm going to leave this slide up while I tell you a story about myself. About 11 a.m. one Friday morning, I went to the emergency room. All I wanted was a prescription for some antibiotics to fix what seemed like an obvious case of pneumonia. I knew this wasn't COVID because I had already been there and done that. This was just a simple case of pneumonia. All I needed was a little medicine to boost up my willpower. I would cure myself if the doctors would just give me what I wanted. That time I was oscillating between willpower and compensation. But Friday afternoon, I admitted I was powerless over my life. I was willing to submit all of me to the medical technique. That evening, my new team of doctors admitted they too were powerless over whether I lived or died. On Friday night, I detached from myself and became a spectator. I was now in the realm of the spiritual. When I woke from surgery on Saturday, I had changed. I knew I had undergone a spiritual awakening, though I could not identify what this one would bring. On Sunday, they found the right antibiotics. On Monday, they identified the right dose and application technique. As I lay there, I realized I was the new tenant in a previously used body. The old tenant had left. I could look back on all the anger, love, expectations, resentments, hopes, and joys the old tenant left behind. Those were all in the past. The old tenant left behind much unresolved conflict. That is his conflict. It is not mine. Some ways now, I'm an archaeologist examining an ancient ruin. Those memories are not mine. I can examine each and have compassion and sympathy for the soul who once lived there. My goal now is to let go of the past. I can accept that the past is just memories to be examined at my leisure. I do not need to blame anyone, not even myself. In the present, I do not need to contribute to the problem, and I should not expect others to fix my problems or fix my loved one. Yes, there are times for medical assistance, yet no matter their expertise, it's still up to each of us to be responsible for availing ourselves of that assistance. As for the future, I just might be fully enlightened in the future. I just might be fully recovered in the future, but that is not today. Just for today, I'll have the patience to wait for the changes that God will send my way. My responsibility is to admit my part in creating my own chaos. Then I need to choose to go back to steps 6 and 7 and wait in anticipation of the full revelation of the changes that are now underway. I'll close now with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you for allowing me to share.